It's now more important than ever before to be conscious rather than, to be making conscious rather than unconscious decisions about what data you're collecting, where it is being stored and shared, who has access to the data, who owns the data, what are the risks, and more importantly, what are the controls around managing those risks. So the real challenge facing data leaders now is how to build an effective data culture, not just within the data and technology teams, but also across the rest of the organization. And that's a tricky thing. Right. So if you feel that you own the governance, you own the data security, you are accountable for that, then potentially you'll make different decisions, or you'll make better decisions for the organization, because you will not just think about the business outcomes in terms of financial outcomes or sales, etc. You will also think in terms of the risks and the threats that come along with that. And so I think the traditional models around fixed, ongoing structures, I think will start to crumble as we move forward. It will become more and more flatter structures where teams are more and more getting, the autonomy and empowerment to self-organize. People are feeling the pressure to engage with AI and move forward and show some runs on the board and deliver some outcomes and be able to talk about AI outcomes, etc. And while that's a good thing, I think you got to move and certainly start thinking in that direction, but you cannot ignore, the safeguards and the risks.
Hello and welcome to the Enterprise Tech Talk podcast. I am your host, Saumitra Kalikar. Now, the topic of today's conversation is something that is firmly on the agenda of CIOs, CDOs, and increasingly on the board agenda as well. And that is how to modernize the data functions to deliver strategic business outcomes. And this is because over the last decade or so, organizations have invested in data capabilities, but have struggled to map those investments to quantifiable business benefits. So the question is, what fundamentally needs to change within data functions to deliver real business value? And to help me unpack this important topic, I'm joined today by Surit Sethi. Surit is a senior technology executive with deep experience in establishing and managing data functions in large, complex, and regulatory environments. Surit, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks for having me.
Many listeners would know Surit and I have worked in the past. So Surit, it's been a while, but what's happening? How are you now these days?
Yeah, good. It's been about 6 months, hasn't it, Saumitra, since we worked together last. I've had a bit of a break in that period, and I've been really enjoying the time to refresh, recharge, travel, and also to reflect a little bit on what I want to do in the next phase of my life. So it's been a really good opportunity to take a step back from the day to day and just figure out what is it that, that'll give me joy for the next period of my life.
Before we get started, Sarit, if you don't mind, if you can provide a brief overview about your background or audience, particularly in the context of today's topic. And maybe you can also tell us how you got involved in the data domain. What excites you to be in this domain?
Yeah, thanks, Sumitra. So I guess a little bit of an introduction first. So I've been working for I have experience for over 30 years, and it sounds like a lot, and you feel like an old man when you say something like that. But time has gone really quick, and I've had the pleasure of working across different geographies. So I worked in India first, then I worked in Australia. I started my career in the business because my background was a business background. I did my bachelor's in commerce and my MBA in marketing and finance. And then I joined ANZ to start my career in banking. And that was on the business side. And then over a period of time, I kind of, moved into technology, maybe by accident, right? Because I was seconded as a business SME onto an IT project, and I really enjoyed, helping technology to understand what the business requirements would be. That role was a business analyst role to start with. And then I just found that I had that unique ability, given my business background, to actually interpret the requirements in a way that the technology teams would understand. So, and I had some really good feedback. I had a good experience. So I kind of stayed in technologies from there, right? So I moved into a lot of technology management roles since then, and I worked across different industries in financial services as well as health insurance, where we last worked together as well. My last role was at Medibank, which was general manager for data, and that was a fun experience. I can say now, reflecting back, but a great learning experience as well, because I moved into the role just a couple of months before the cyber incident happened, and that was quite a roller coaster ride, as you know. We went through that together. But the learnings that we've had since then, and the achievements that we've had, as a collective, as a team, I feel like I'm now ready to share that knowledge and help other organizations as well. So that's part of my plans for the foreseeable future as well. And to help that, help me prepare for that, I have actually been investing my time over the last 3 months doing my GAICD, qualification company directors course. I've appeared for the exam. I've done my assignment as well, and I'm just waiting for the results. So fingers crossed over there that I get that over the line, and then I can get on to potentially getting onto the boards of one or two companies, but equally doing some consulting and helping companies to share the experiences that I've had and help them to manage their data better.
Let's start with a broader context, Surit. So, so if you look at the data function, right, or how it has evolved, historically, I remember data function was primarily considered as a reporting function within the organizations. It used to deliver, responsible for delivering reports to all parts of business operations, right? But as organizations started focusing more on customer experience to personalization and the recent growth in AI, that means data has become a really important and strategic asset now, right? And what it means, like the expectations from CIOs, CEOs, and even board has shifted over a period of years. You have been in this industry for a long time, so I wanted to get your perspective as to how the expectation from a role, your role, like a head of data function role, has evolved over a period of time.
Yeah, that's a great question, Sumitra. It's something that I have had the opportunity to reflect on as well. And while I was doing my GICD course as well, I through the simulation exercises, through the assignment, etc., I got the opportunity to put myself in the shoes of the board and the directors and how they kind of view this as well. So what I feel is that it's the expectations internally are a function of how the external environment is changing around us, right? So the internal expectations are influenced now over the recent past by the changing expectations from both customers as well as regulators. So people are now more aware than ever before. Not only people like you and me who are in the data and technology domain, but also the common man and woman just on the street. Everyone is more aware of the need for privacy and for data protection, and they are expecting more from organizations, right? So the cyber incident, at my last organization occurred as we spoke about, in a short period after I moved into the role. But the experience taught me about managing expectations, not just from customers and regulators, but also from the staff involved, because these things have a big impact on the staff, and the staff feel a sense of responsibility around managing data, etc. Right? So data leaders now really have a balancing role. It's a fine balancing role where they need to manage expectations of internal stakeholders, but it has to be in the context of a rapidly evolving external environment relating to cyber threats and the opportunities and threats that come with AI, as you're aware. while also balancing the needs of the people that you're leading. And you have a large team typically when you're in these sort of roles, and the people are looking at you to guide them and to support them in a constantly changing environment. So it's a multifaceted and therefore very exciting role to be in these days. Another role that has, I think, evolved more recently for data leaders is about educating their peers and the business teams as well about how to manage data effectively and what data ownership really means. Because we talk about data ownership and the fact that there has to be a clear owner of data. Business needs to own data, but the concept is not very well understood and not consistently understood across business areas. So I think as a data leader, that's part of our responsibility to get that alignment and understanding across the organization on what it really means for them.
And you briefly mentioned this, but this is I wanted to unpack the fund more as to it looks there is a healthy tension emerging between when it comes to the data assets or how you manage the data for organization, because at one side there is a emerging focus and acknowledgement that data is strategic as and how we can use it for better customer experience and innovation and competitive advantage, etc. At the other side, as you briefly mentioned, data also poses significant risks in today's world, particularly when it comes to managing customers' privacy, operating within customer allowed consents, operating within your risk appetite, and some of these things, and responding however to regulators. So, again, as a head of data function, the how do you see organizations should balance that out, enabling the innovation, etc., but at the same time doing it safely?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, isn't it? Look, I'm sure everyone's heard about data as a strategic asset. There's been a lot of conversation around that in recent times. I've heard people say data needs to be treated as oil. It's probably even more relevant with what's happening around us in the world at the moment and how expensive oil is becoming and how precious that is. So it's probably not a bad analogy, to think about. But what sometimes people don't realize is and focus enough on, as you're saying, is the data can also become a liability if it is not managed properly. So, with cyber incidents, privacy laws, customer expectations, rising costs of managing security, etc., all become relevant, and therefore it's now more important than ever before to be conscious, rather than to be making conscious rather than unconscious decisions about what data you're collecting, where it is being stored and shared, who has access to the data, who owns the data, what are the risks, and more importantly, what are the controls around managing those risks and managing the data in place? And you got to look at this strategically and not just every person doing it for their own business area. It has to be up to the executives, up to the data leaders, but also up to the business leaders and the board even to be strategic about what risks are acceptable, what are unacceptable, what is the risk appetite that the company has, and then to manage, the data collection, the data storage, management, and security and controls in that light, so that everything is being done as a conscious decision rather than just happening around the company. To different levels of control, depending on how the respective business leaders look at it. So it has to be driven at an enterprise level, and it has to be driven at very senior levels and communicated very clearly across the organization, which otherwise it can very fast become a liability.
Yeah, yeah. So on that point, let us discuss the concept of modern data function, building on what you just said. Um, because many people see that modern data function means investing into new technologies, which is of course part of the consideration, but that's not everything in my view. You need to look at the operating model aspects. You need to look at the skills aspects and many other things, right? Relationship with the business, etc. So, uh, would you mind painting the high-level picture about when we talk about modern data function?
Yeah, that's a good question as well. So, look, as I think you were alluding to, traditionally modern in technology world, was spoken about in reference to how new the technology was, whether we've refreshed the technology, whether it's been upgraded, whether you've got uh, support in place and things like that. But I think, as we've been discussing, modern technology functions and modern data functions specifically uh, are expected to be more resilient and managed proactively as well. So there is the management aspect, which is becoming far more important. The whole framework around that, rather than just the technology itself. Um, and therefore, it's far more than just a technology refresh now. It includes all aspects around clear data ownership, risk management framework, all of those things being in place. Um, I'll also add that a real challenge facing data leaders now is how to build an effective data culture, not just within the data and technology teams, but also across the rest of the organization. And that's a tricky thing, right? It's not, because culture is very difficult to define and very difficult to measure, and especially across large organizations. Um, so everyone in the organization, for example, has to be aware of the consequences of collecting, storing, sharing data. So in that sense, there has to be a real consciousness around what is the data culture in the organization, right? How do people view data? How do they view awareness or their responsibilities around the data? Because I firmly believe that managing data is everyone's business. It's not just the responsibility of a small data governance team sitting in one corner. And I had a small team. At one point, it was 3 people, and then it grew from there. But the key thing for me in that role, but equally for other data leaders, in other organizations, is around how you harness that energy and get that consistent understanding and awareness and build that level of knowledge and education around the organization, so people understand what it means. They know where to go for guidance, and they know exactly what they are allowed to do, what the boundaries are, because especially with AI coming in, it's important to have principles, uh, policies around, and a controlled framework around how you're using data. So that's, I think, part of the whole modern technology or data function now, because it can't exist with just technology alone. It has to coexist with a proper framework around it, which has risks, controls, education, culture. Everything has to be a part of that. And I think one thing which is still evolving in the industry is around uh, consequence management, right? So people will say and do and try and do the right thing by and large around data. However, unless there's a real consequence management framework that's built into people's responsibilities, and there are consequences around not complying, or not being as resilient as you want people to be, depending on the culture and the risk appetite of the organization, then um, it's just not going to get taken that seriously as it needs to be around potential misuse of data.
Yeah. Let's speak or focus a little bit on the operating model about data function as well, because that is something I wanted to pick up. Because I mean, all the IT functions, right? Historically, now it's not only data function. Well, you take any IT function, historically have largely been very central functions, right? Yeah, central data teams, central architecture teams, centralized security teams, etc. They would deliver services to rest of the business. At how the historic operating model was, but the broader IT operating models are now changing. There are new patterns emerging where you're talking about more federated operating models, where part of the IT functions are being embedded into other parts of the business to allow them more autonomy, etc. Right? How do you see data function from that operating model perspective evolving? What patterns are emerging, and maybe pros and cons of some patterns as well?
Yeah, it's certainly an area that's been evolving, Sumitra, as you've seen as well. Look, I think what we are starting to see increasingly work well is the emergence of empowered end-to-end teams, within an operating model. So traditionally, we've had a clear distinction and separation between business and IT teams and data functions, and the data warehouse team sits separately from the data analytics team and the reporting teams, etc. So now, I think increasingly what we are seeing is that uh, end-to-end teams that are empowered to deliver business outcomes tend to achieve more, and that model tends to work better than the traditional model where there are a lot of handoffs. Um, but it's important to have awareness around the outcome and clarity for the teams around the outcome that is being delivered there. Otherwise, traditionally what's happened is people have become almost slaves to to the funding question, to how we structured and the constraints that we've had, and people try to do the best that they can within the constraints that they have, and that's how they've been measured, right? Uh, but but I think you get the best outcomes, and increasingly we're seeing organizations tend towards this model where you build teams around a specific outcome, and the teams have to be therefore agile, not just in terms of how they're working day to day, but also in terms of how they're structured. Because once you deliver one outcome, then you might need to reorganize yourselves, to kind of structure around the next outcome and how to deliver that in the best possible manner. So I think the traditional models around fixed, ongoing structures, I think will start to crumble as we move forward. It will become more and more flatter structures where teams are more and more getting, the autonomy and empowerment to self-organize around outcomes, and then they measured on the outcomes that they're delivering, not just around working within specific constraints and how far they moved, etc. It's either you're achieving the outcome or you're not achieving the outcome, and therefore and one of the things that has to evolve to kind of support that model, which is a shift from the traditional models, is around how teams are measured and how they're rewarded as well, right? So how targets are set and how people are encouraged to compete almost with each other, right? Because you have these ranking systems in organizations where people are compared against each other. So if you have to do better than someone else, then someone else has to do worse than you, by definition. So I think those models have to, and HR functions are increasingly becoming aware of that and working towards that, towards resolving that, because you got to encourage business outcomes to become the focus rather than individual performances. So, but that's a challenge that I think we've got to work closely with as leaders and as data leaders. We got to work closely with our HR partners and solve that conundrum as well.
And in that future, do you see there will still be some centralized data team in some shape or form? And if that is the case, what could be that centralized accountability? And then what roles and what accountability might be federated out?
I think it's not going to just all disappear. It's there's while we have truly end-to-end teams delivering, there is uh, I think the question of what sits in the business and what sits in technology, etc., becomes less relevant. However, regardless of where it's sitting, you still need to drive, a certain structure around, what is the data strategy, what is the governance framework within the teams are supposed to operate, what is the architecture, and how is that going to be taken forward? What's the strategy around that? What are the controls that we're implementing? What are the policies and processes that are being put into place? I think all of those functions have to still have some amount of central ownership, because you can't just let every team decide this for yourself. You got to have you know uh, an organizational data strategy. You got to have a governance framework, policies, controls, etc., which align with the organization's risk appetite, with the strategy of the board and the strategic outcomes that the company is striving for. So I think a lot of those functions, monitoring, auditing that, putting governance around it, even though you want to have an element of self-governance, but there has to be some amount of, second level, third level functions that are auditing, governing the use of data and how these teams are working. And that's not just from a risk and security perspective, it's also from a consistency, from a continuous improvement perspective, so that we're all moving forward at the same pace and consistently as an organization. So some of those functions will still need to be driven centrally, in my view.
Let's move on and discuss a little bit about the economics aspects of how you managed investments within data function. Now, historically, like many other IT functions, most of the initial investments in data functions are very project-based. And to be honest, in most of the organizations, that still is the case. But as you see, some of the more mature organizations where the data functions are more mature, they have started embarking the new approaches of building data products, for example, and they're having more product-based investment approach, and not necessarily project-based. Do you see most of the organizations will eventually put that way into certified and well-defined data products and product investments and funding products instead of funding individual projects to deliver into categories?
Look, that's an interesting one as well, because I think, as you rightly said, that traditional funding model has been getting challenged over the last 2-3 years, increasingly so, and we're seeing similar to what I was speaking about, the HR function kind of evolving and aligning with how things are moving. We're also seeing the finance function similarly aligning and adapting to the new way of working, and how best they can support the business and technology and data teams to achieve their outcomes. So I think that there's still a role for project funding in some cases. So it's as an example, where you're replacing a major platform, or you're building a completely new capability that's across the enterprise. Uh, and especially if there is a strategic investment involved, I think that there's probably still a role for whether you call it project or an initiative-based funding, purely from the perspective of being able to monitor the achievement of business benefits, and make sure that we're making the right decisions, and controlling some of that spend. However, more and more, as I think you were referring to as well, the the funding model seems to be evolving uh, towards product funding. However, it's not just simply product funding. I would call it, it's more around funding the teams that we were speaking about. So if we speak about building end-to-end teams, so I think what we seem to be evolving towards is having funded teams in place, which are driving business outcomes based on business priorities. Uh, and once those teams are funded, then I think, in terms of driving the right behaviors in the organization, it helps to drive the right behaviors, because then the conversation is around what's the best priority and what's the highest priority for driving the best business outcome, rather than where's the next 1,000 or 10,000 or $100,000 funding going to come from, right? Because we've seen in the past, a lot of those conversations can become involved. It can take months. It can be unproductive, where people are generally, basically organizations doing business with themselves and trying to find out where the funding is going to come from, how we're going to charge them out. I think we're moving away from that, which is really good to see. So in that sense, if we have funded teams, whether they are funded product teams, as you're referring to, or they are structured around driving another business outcome, uh, I think that's probably going to be more and more what we will see going forward, unless there's a major strategic initiative that is being implemented, which I think, by the nature of uh, the amount of investment that the board is making, they would probably like to see some amount of control and reporting back on how much spend is being approved to deliver what outcome, and whether the business benefits are being realized or not. So I think it's probably going to be a mix, but we'll see less and less of project funding as we move forward.
Yeah, and the question is about measuring the value of these investments. So, what are the key OKRs or KPIs that you think will still be relevant going forward when it comes to data investments? Are those around mainly around risk, compliance, or more about growth?
Yeah, I think that's a very organization specific question, which can have different answers at different points in time. It's also a function of where the organization is at, and what the priorities are that the board has decided that the organization needs to focus on. So um, I think it's every company has to decide that for themselves. But the key thing here is that these decisions should not be based on what's been done in the past and you just keep doing the same. It has to be consciously, you got to consciously sit down. Um, and increasingly, it's important to be nimble and agile around the changing environment and being able to adapt to that. So I'd probably say once a quarter, you need to sit down rather than once a year, as we've done in the past, to determine what the next quarter's targets should be, what the priorities are, what the board is expecting, how the external environment has evolved, what have we achieved, and what have we learned from the last quarter, and how do we actually want to focus our energies and our funding and the people on the next quarter, and then continues to keep evolving and adapting to that, because the answer in the first quarter might be different to the answer in the second quarter, depending on where you are in your journey as an organization.
Mm. Let's shift our focus on the next area which I wanted to explore with you. That is around the data governance, right? And of course, nowadays, trust has become a very important consideration at the board level as well. Building customer trust, and data governance, data in particular, plays a very significant role there. Um, but at the same time, as organizations want to be more agile and be more innovative and experimentative, how do you see the data governance as a function evolving, where they need to be accountable for certain standards, guardrails, etc., safety of the data, but at the same time allowing this to be more agile?
Yeah, so I think the way we look at traditionally, I think if you had asked that question maybe a year, 2 years back, the answer would have been more around what the data governance team should be doing and how they should be driving the governance and outcomes. I think increasingly now, as we've been discussing, uh, the the expectation is more and more that governance is built into how we do things rather than a separate function which is responsible for that. So everyone is accountable for building governance into the way they operate, into the delivery functions, rather than just having it as a separate weight down the track. So I feel it's similar to how software testing was viewed a few years back, right? We used to have development completed and then moving over in a waterfall approach into testing, and then we used to move forward. But then increasingly we realized that the later you found bugs and the later you found issues and defects, the more costly, the more difficult it was to fix them, right? So I think governance is going in a similar kind of fashion now, where we're finding that it's too late, as an afterthought to once processes are completed, delivery models are built, to then put governance on top of that. We have to think about governance as embedded and as part of the way. It's just how we do things, right? So every process, every business function, every data function has to have an element of governance, an element of control built within the function itself, rather than separately, because the expectation from the regulators as well as our customers is nothing less than that. Well, they want to see not just how we are responding to incidents and events, but what are we doing to actually prevent them from occurring in the first place. And that can only happen when governance becomes a way of doing things. It becomes embedded into the culture itself, into our DNA. And we think of risk and we think of governance when we're thinking of driving a new process or a new product or a new outcome. And it's just a part of how we do business.
And in the whole new governance model, how do you see the ownership of business data, customer data residing? And do you think that's the right approach to basically make business accountable for the data they are more responsible for? They use while applying the common governance standards that data governance team will be establishing.
Yeah, I think it has to be. It has to be, Sumitra. I'm sure you'll agree that when you see a separation between the collection and use of data from the responsibilities around ownership and governance, then it just doesn't work. It's like you can have one small team somewhere accountable for driving a certain outcome, and not having any authority to control what's happening upfront around that function, and it's never going to work. So it's the same with data governance. It's the same around security. Unless the business leaders, unless the business teams are educated and are aware, and the ownership resides within that business domain or the business area, which is actually making the decisions on what to do. It's no different to what we were just discussing on the last question, right? It's you got to build governance into your processes and what you're doing, and then that'll only come with ownership, right? So if you feel that you own the governance, you own the data security, you are accountable for that, then you will make potentially you'll make different decisions, or you'll make better decisions for the organization, because you will not just think about the business outcomes in terms of financial outcomes or sales, etc. You will also think in terms of the risks and the threats that come along with that, and you'll make more balanced decisions. So I think it's important to have that ownership reside within the business, where it drives the right thinking, it drives the right behaviors, it drives the right outcomes, and it just becomes a way of governance, and just becomes a way of thinking, and it helps to drive the right culture, all of those things that we've been discussing. And that can't happen if there's separation between who's actually driving the function versus who's accountable for governance around that. It has to go hand in hand.
Yeah, yeah. We discussed about the culture, and the other important point I wanted to unpack with you was about the skill, the talent within the data function. There in the historically, the data function had different skills, right? From data architecture, data engineers, data operations, data stewardship, and so on and so forth, right? As in the modern data function that we are talking about here, are there any new skills and talent needs emerging? What are the gaps there? Important gaps that you would like to highlight that organizations should focus on?
Yeah. So Sumitra, the way I look at that is in the context of what we've been discussing as well. I think the biggest gap that I'm seeing at the moment, which data teams and data leaders are increasingly required to play, a leading role, but equally other leaders have to, play a role in that, is around building the data literacy and awareness across the organization. It's not just, I don't think the gap is specifically, there's a big gap in the data teams as such, but there is a big gap in data literacy, awareness, governance, culture around the whole organization outside of the data team, right? So this is where I think it's really important for us to face into that as executives, as leaders, not just in technology and IT, but also technology and data, but also in the business, and also at the board level, where we face into the kind of questions that we've been discussing before around how do we build that whole culture, the whole framework, the entire consequence management, the data literacy, awareness. So certainly data teams have a significant role to play. Even in my last role in the last organization, my team was playing a huge role in educating the business and lifting the whole awareness around the use of data, and the governance and controls that need to be in place, and driving the ownership and responsibilities, etc. So I think that is we got to continue the momentum on that. We've started to build that, and I'm in the seminars and conferences I'm attending, I'm seeing increasingly data leaders are talking about this, and that's becoming a consistent theme. So we've got to support each other, work with our business counterparts, and continue that momentum, and drive that, because that's where I think the real benefits to organizations will be in the future. Specifically around technical skills, if you ask, I think it's probably not a great surprise to anyone to hear that AI is the one area which there's still a little bit of confusion in some instances around, okay, how much to engage, how much not to engage, what skills do we need, and it's such a rapidly evolving space that that's where I think you got to sit and consciously make some strategic choices around how do we want to engage. And I was reading just this morning on LinkedIn. I think somebody had posted a really good article which spoke about, and they were saying you cannot have an AI strategy unless you have a data strategy. And I think that's really true, because you got to work out how you're managing the data and what you want to be using the data for before you can apply the AI lens on top of that, right? And it's important to make sure that the data that you have is reliable, and the quality of the data, and the reliability of the data and the trust around the data exists before you start driving AI outcomes using that data. Because if you're using the data that you don't trust, and no matter how much AI you apply on top of that, it's not going to give you the right outcome. So I think AI and data strategies and skills and awareness and policies all have to go hand in hand. And I think that that's an area that's still evolving, where there's still a bit of confusion in organizations.
Yeah. Um, and as you rightly said, most organizations are moving ahead with the AI strategy, but not necessarily giving enough attendance focus on the data strategy. And it's no surprise that there was a report from MIT or somewhere that 90% of organizations, they are doing AI experiments and pilots, etc., but they're struggling to move those pilots and experiments into production, and that's where they're failing. So, and one of the reasons potentially is the readiness, both from use case definite identification perspective, but also building the backbone, I would say, from data and technology perspective. Right. So, what's your advice to those people who are the executives who are moving ahead with the AI strategy, as to how they should actually temper their expectations, um, and to make sure that data security and the rest of the technology backbone is well prepared?
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point, Sumitra, because it's very tempting, and at times finding that people are, business leaders increasingly are feeling the pressure from what's happening out in the market and what's happening, what some of their competitors might be doing, or what's happening internationally. People are feeling the pressure to engage with AI and move forward and show some runs on the board and deliver some outcomes and be able to talk about AI outcomes, etc. And while that's a good thing, I think you got to move and certainly start thinking in that direction. But you cannot ignore, the safeguards and the risks that come, safeguards that need to be in place, and the risks that come with this at the same time. Um, However, it's also very easy, and I'm finding some organizations are doing the exact opposite as well, where they're just saying, "No, sorry, we're not ready. We're not going to engage with AI. It's too risky. It's too new. It's unproven, and I'm not going to do it." And I think the answer has to be somewhere in between. You got to balance it out. It has to be customized for the organization, the risk appetite of the organization, where the organization is at any point in time, what the strategic outcomes are and the priorities are that you're focusing. So you got to make the choice and make your own decision, but do it in a strategic way where you have a clear target in mind, and you're moving towards that, and you're doing it as an enterprise, and you're communicating very clearly and taking your staff, and your customers on the journey as well. Um, but as you were alluding to as well, and I think of what we spoke about before, to be able to get the best outcome from AI, you got to make sure that you got trustworthy data sitting somewhere and reliable data. So I would say the first step to engaging with AI and driving better AI outcomes would be to do an assessment of where you're at with your data. What you know what has been the experience of the business. Talk to your business, talk to your customers, and understand what the issues are, whether the data is trusted, where the issues are, what needs to be done to lift that level of trust and governance and security, or whatever it is, wherever it is that you are at that point in time. And then build AI layers and AI interfaces on top of that, because then you will, from day one, you'll have reliable outcomes using AI, but you will also have safeguards in place, where your risk frameworks, your security frameworks are all robust enough, and you got policies in place, you got strategy in place before you start playing with those shiny objects, but that it's very tempting otherwise to do.
Okay, so as we wrap up, Surit, I wanted to get your advice on a couple of important points. Uh, so, if let's say somebody is newly being appointed to head of data functions, In the current environment where there is a lot of focus on AI and etc., and there is a lot of focus on modernizing data functions, what will be your guidance to those people who are just getting into this role?
Yeah, so I think the advice is not very different to what it would be to any new leader, right? So whether it's in the data space or you're moving into another leadership position in in a different domain, because I have not always been in the data space. I moved from from credit cards to core banking products to apply and buy, which I implemented in another organization, and then into the data space. So I think the advice would be similar, which is have an open mind when you're going into a role like this. Go in with the mindset that you're there to learn as much you're there to deliver outcomes. Don't think you're the smartest man in the room. Chances are you'll have teams that are smarter in different parts, and your job as a leader is to harness that energy and bring the teams together. So never lose your curiosity, never lose your respect and support for the teams, because your job is to build an integrated, motivated team, which will deliver 100% more for a leader that they respect than they would otherwise be able to do. So I see a lot of leaders going into new roles with the frame of mind that I've got promoted. I'm a really smart person. Um, and I'm expected, sometimes they even put pressure on themselves that I need to have all the answers and the team wants the answers from me. But that's, nothing can be further from the truth, because you are, you know, you're by definition, you're new to the role. You've just come in there. So you can't expect to have all the answers. There are people there in your teams who are technically more qualified. They'll have better answers. They'll have more experience in that particular space than you have. So, uh, see your job as providing leadership support and direction for your teams rather than you being the expert. So as long as you do that, you're curious, and then uh, I feel my job always as a leader is to ensure the team has the right direction, they have the right level of support and guidance, and providing them with the vision. Then my job is to get out of their way, and then just to be available to remove roadblocks and support them in delivering the outcomes, because the teams are the ones will ultimately deliver for you. You can't do anything by yourself.
So on that note, Surit, thank you. Thanks for having here and sharing your insights. This is what I believe this is very relevant to what's happening across the industry today. It was a pleasure hosting you.
Thanks, Sumitra. It's been a pleasure.
If you found this discussion valuable, please follow and subscribe to Enterprise Tech Talk. And thanks for listening. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.